Hello, everyone. I'm Mike McGinn, the Executive Director of America Walks, and we are right on the top of the hour. I'm just going to give a minute for everybody to join in, and we'll get the program going in a couple of seconds. I will say that, again, Mike McGinn, Executive Director of America Walks, and this is, since I started the job 3.5 years ago, this is actually, in some ways, the webinar I look forward to the most, just kind of like taking a look at where we stand in transportation. It's an opportunity to look back a little bit, but it's actually a little more of an opportunity to look ahead as well, see what's coming at us in the transportation world. And if you're a regular follower of America Walks or attendee of our webinars, there's a lot going on. So today I am joined by, excuse me, Nailah Pope-Harden. She's an America Walks board member. She's also the executive director of Climate Plan California, which is a network of dozens of organizations. Their vision to create a healthier, more sustainable California, where people of all backgrounds and incomes have the opportunity to thrive. And it's really an organization that focuses on grassroots advocacy and how to bring people together to influence change. So she's been a great helper on the America Walks board because that's our vision as well. Our panelists today, our presenters today, well, first we have to say some thank yous. Centers for Disease Control, their Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, supports us. They support education around how to build healthier places for people. And we're grateful to them. And I urge you to look up and join Active People, Healthy Nation. And we're also grateful to our other supporters as well. We are also grateful for the individuals who contribute to us and help us make this possible. So our panelists today are Beth Osborne, who is the, I'm getting ahead of ourselves. I'll introduce the panelists, then we'll go back a slide, Ben. Our panelists today are Beth Osborne. She's the Director of Transportation for America. She has worked at USDOT on transportation policy. She has worked for a US Senator. She's worked for a member of the House of Representatives. Transportation for America is a real leader in identifying and catalyzing action on issues across the transportation spectrum. We're also, our other panelist today is Corinne Kisner. She's the executive director of NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And she's an urban planner dedicated to building safe, sustainable transportation systems and equitable, active cities through better street design and transportation policy. We've partnered with them on numerous issues, including the update on the Federal Street Manual, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, on safer vehicles, and on other transportation policies. And NACTO is the coalition of local city transportation officials who have more of a focus on building people-centered places rather than a focus on moving vehicles alone. So we're really excited to have both of them. They'll both do a short presentation, and then back to how you can participate. There is a Q&A tab. You'll see it below. Feed your questions in there, and we will be tracking them, and we will get to them. And everybody always asks, will there be a recording? And the answer to that is yes, there will be a recording, and we always post it to the YouTube channel. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Beth to get us launched.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to pull up my presentation real quick. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon or morning, wherever you are. It is my job to talk about a little bit of the year ahead, particularly at the federal level in transportation. But to get into the year ahead, I really want to talk about where we're coming from and put it in perspective. Real quick, I just want to make sure for those that might not be familiar with Transportation for America, we are a national nonprofit focused on the transportation system and pushing for that system to be more oriented towards getting people where they need to go, no matter how they travel, no matter their financial means, physical ability, no matter where they come from, or what ethnic or racial group they belong to. The things I'm going to go over, I'm going to focus a little bit on what the IIJA spending, that's the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed back in 2021, what it looks like, what we can expect from it, a little bit of an opportunity to make sure you all are aware of, our new Dangerous by Design report, a little information on polling, and moving into the next transportation reauthorization, which I know seems impossible that we're talking about already, but we are. So first, just a little information about the infrastructure law. You'll notice that the majority of it goes to surface transportation, the part that we think of in the transportation world as the highway and transit bill. And what stands out here is how much of the funding now goes to rail. You'll notice that the intercity rail slice of the pie is almost as big as transit. However, the transit slice and the highway slice have stayed in proportion since 1982. So when you hear people say we've gotten more money for transit than we've ever gotten before, just want to make sure that the way you get more money for transit is for every dollar for transit, you give $4 to highways. And that hasn't altered in over 40 years. Within the highway funds, we get a lot of focus on exciting programs like the carbon reduction program, Protect, which is about climate resilience, the highway safety improvement program, and things like that. I want to make clear that they are little slices of the pie compared to the big pieces, which are the highway performance program and the surface transportation block grant. These are very flexible programs, but they tend to be used for status quo work. And if we're not focused on the 75% that DOTs can use in any way they want, we can miss the fact that these little slices can get swamped by these big pieces. And in safety, it looks a little bit like this. We're just digging our hole deeper while the safety programs are asked to fill it up, and they can't keep up with how fast we're digging that hole. So from Transportation for America's perspective, we aren't interested in the fact that now we have little slices of the pie for us. We're interested in how the overall spending impacts the experience of people who use our roadways, particularly outside of a car, for people who want to be active, who need to get around outside of a car to accomplish their daily needs. So there's also a bunch of competitive grant programs that are worth highlighting that are exciting. But again, remember, it's a $450 billion program, and I want you to look at the size of these programs, which are much smaller. But I do want to bring people's attention to the Safe Streets and Roads for All program in particular. This is a program really focused on taking highways that are a barrier to people who are walking, or mostly state highways and arterial roadways, those big 5, 6, 7 lane roads that are high speed, that divide our communities, and to turn them into more of a boulevard or a complete street, so that it can be utilized for all the people who are allowed to be on that roadway. A lot of times people are hearing about Reconnecting Communities program, which is also very important, or even the RAISE program, which I didn't even write up here. But Safe Streets and Roads for All has a really interesting quirk. And by quirk, I mean huge mistake in the drafting of the program. And that is Congress accidentally made 40% of the program available for planning. It was meant to be someplace around 10%. It got written and passed into law as 40%. And there isn't a demand for that much planning. There's much more demand for building. However, USDOT has made the planning grants open for demonstration projects. And I really encourage people to think about whether or not your area where you're from or one of the agencies you're working with or might be in could utilize this funding for that. They have entirely too much money. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, almost $1 billion this year that they can't move. So if you come in with an eligible project, you are going to get it funded. And demonstration projects can be extremely powerful in making the case for change in a community that in theory might be scary, but in reality is very exciting when people see it. We have worked with a bunch of communities on making very inexpensive temporary changes to the roadway using just things like delineators and barrels and paint. But by doing it, it allows the community to touch and feel and move around and experience the change and give feedback to their agencies that is easier to give and more meaningful than what we find happens when you hold a hearing and you hold sketches up. So this might not seem like something that is super exciting. Oh heck, we could go and get some money for demonstration projects. We have seen it completely transform local debates about whether or not a road needs to be redesigned. And so I cannot encourage people more to think about how to pull down that money. It'll help DOT make the case for keeping the program funded, and this money is as guaranteed as any federal money can be. And if people would like more information about the sorts of projects we've done with localities, this one is in South Bend when Secretary Buttigieg was Mayor Buttigieg. And as you can see, with tens of thousands of dollars and some local volunteers, they were able to create a traffic circle and completely redesign this huge intersection. And it was hugely popular. They were able to measure the impact of the redesign and bring people out, educate them, and get them excited. So pay attention to that Safe Streets and Roads for All program and think about whether or not it's something you all want to take advantage of. This year, we're also going to update our Dangerous by Design report, where we report on the safety of people moving around on foot on American roadways. Our last report was in 2022, based on 2020 statistics, because USDOT is quite delayed in putting out the data for years. And you'll see that the numbers in 2020 in terms of people who were killed while walking went up, even though there had been the largest decline in driving that we had seen in history. And we saw in 2021 the not completed, but the estimate for the fatalities was much worse than even 2020. These are the most dangerous metro areas, according to that report. That dotted line between Stockton and Fresno shows the level at which we had ranked cities as the most dangerous in our past report. So you can see that these cities are leapfrogging up in danger. So yes, Deltona might be the most dangerous now, but it doesn't mean that Stockton is less dangerous than it used to be. It is substantially more dangerous, just it couldn't keep up with the danger on other roads. Same thing on states. New Mexico became the most dangerous state, but not because Florida got safer. Florida got more dangerous, but New Mexico got so much more dangerous that they beat Florida. And one thing I would really like to highlight for folks is these states are announcing to the world what they're hoping to accomplish in safety. And the information about what they're trying to do is on Federal Highway's website. So this is what Florida said. You can see at the bottom, you can see their annual number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. You can see the 5-year average, which is what they're rated on, and they have a target of 0. Now, in the document, they make clear that they know they're not hitting 0. they actually publish some additional numbers of what they actually project will happen on their roadway. And you'll see that these numbers are higher than their 5-year average, and they are going up. So their actual targets, their actual plan, their actual understanding of how safe or dangerous it's going to get, no matter what they say, is it's going to get worse. You can see all the states. I pulled out Pennsylvania. One thing you will notice is that you can't see the targets for 2019 and 2020. Those data are available. FHWA doesn't like to share it because it tends to be bad news. So you'll see that in their targets in 2018, they didn't hit their target in 2019, or they did okay, I guess, in 2020. But you can see back then they planned for things to get worse, and now they've just reset and they plan for things to get worse. If you want to make a call for change, we have to hold our states accountable, and there is information available to the public to help us to do that. I'd also like to point out that we've done some polling and had help from America Walks in terms of creating the questions. But for all of the claims that states have to expand roads and speed up traffic, and that's why they can't make space for people walking and biking and making things safer, the American people don't believe that doing this makes traffic better. In fact, 36%, the most that answered in any one way, think it will make it worse. And while the DOTs and the public don't believe in induced demand, I'm sorry, the DOTs and elected officials often don't believe induced demand is real, the public does. And a majority don't think it will have any effect. And so we have to recognize most people understand what we understand. And when we asked which of the following approaches would be the best and worst long-term solutions to traffic in your area, this is the best long-term solutions. They say repairing existing road, providing more options, and you have to go all the way down to the bottom to find anyone that says building new highways and freeways. So the public gets it. We have to make sure the people in charge get it. So as I pointed out, and I'll share these links with you all, there's more information about how states are performing on Federal Highways website, and we're looking to create a more interactive performance website so that people can utilize it. We also provided a tool to help people, advocates, better understand where the hooks for power and change to the program are. And our goal is to help people hold states accountable and point out what is and isn't working in the program so that we can gear up for the next reauthorization. Right now, our officials in DC believe that the program is working perfectly. Why would you change a program that is working perfectly? We can utilize these pieces of information, explain where we're falling down and why we need change. And we need to start that now. So I'm going to hand things over to Corinne, and then we'll be available to answer any questions you have.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Beth. Really terrific to see those polling numbers. That's really interesting information. So thanks so much for sharing that. Hi all, I'm Corinne Kisner. I'm the Executive Director of NACDO. Really excited to be here today, and thanks to America Walks for inviting me. A bit about NACDO first is that we're the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And as Mike said, we're a network of cities working together to advance safety, sustainability, and equity in local transportation through work at all levels of government. So I first wanted to start out with this map because as I look back at 2023 and ahead to 2024, one trend that's really exciting to me is that new cities are joining the movement all the time. We have requests for information about joining NACDO coming in left and right, and new cities that are joining our ranks. So just, in 2023, we were joined by Greenville, South Carolina, Charlottesville, Virginia, Bozeman, Montana, just to name a few. And I expect this growth to continue in the year ahead. So that says to me that more and more cities are really affirming their goals for safe and sustainable and equitable transportation systems and are joining this community of practitioners who are working to create change. Looking at the year ahead, as Beth said, also requires that we look at where we've come from and motivating the work that NACDO does, that all the organizations on this call are doing are the intertwined challenges of climate, of safety, and of equity. These are the motivating forces behind our work, and that will continue to be true in the year ahead. Beth covered this information really thoroughly, especially through the great information in the Dangerous by Design report. So I won't spend too much time here, but know that these continue to be the motivating forces for our work. What I do want to spend some time talking about and what to watch in 2024 is, first of all, changing national design guidance. It's a big moment for national design guidance. And I'll start, of course, with the MUTCD. And a little bit of history first is that NACDO has been building a years-long campaign to influence the MUTCD. And we're in a moment of pretty significant opportunity. So starting back in January of 2020, NACDO joined the NCUTCD, to layer on another acronym, which is the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. This is the organization that really guides USDOT on the MUTCD. And so for NACDO to join this committee was the first time formally that a city voice was represented in that committee. So that was a significant change and moment for us. In 2021, NACDO mobilized our member cities to call for a really comprehensive overhaul of the MUTCD. We submitted detailed comments, and we partnered with America Walks and T4 and other organizations to really draw greater attention to the outsized role of this document. And so then, after a long wait, just last month in December of 2023, USDOT issued the 11th edition of the MUTCD, which actually goes into effect tomorrow. So this is a timely conversation. The punchline is that the MUTCD does not make the necessary reforms to create comprehensively safe streets, but it does move us closer. And I want to take a moment to appreciate and thank the partnership of America Walks and T4 and the thousands of people who raised their voices and submitted comments to get us to this point, to make this change possible. So NACDO and our member committees are still doing a deep dive analysis of the MUTCD. It's more than 1,000 pages long. So we'll have more information to share in the coming weeks and months. But looking ahead in 2024, two things to watch. One is that states have to adopt the 11th edition of the MUTCD within 2 years. So there's an opportunity and a moment right now for advocacy in the state conversation that I'll talk about. And the other is that the clock starts ticking on the timeline for updating the MUTCD. Again, we've got a 4-year timeline prescribed for that update. So a bit about some of the highlights so far that we're seeing in the MUTCD and what that means for the year ahead. We've got some good news. On speed limit setting in particular, we're seeing a significant improvement. So speed limits will be set based on local safety needs and not based on speeding drivers, and that alone will save lives. So the new MUTCD language replaces the discredited 85th percentile method with a more context-sensitive method that accounts for adjacent land use, pedestrian and bicycle crash needs, and crash history. And so it explicitly encourages using street design to prevent speeding, and it explicitly discourages using the 85th percentile method. The other thing to watch in the year ahead is that FHWA is planning to create guidance this year on speed limit setting. That's an effort that NACDO will be participating in to support and continue pushing FHWA to create guidance that works well for cities. And NACDO actually already has a tool that cities and states can use called City Limits that is fully compliant with the MUTCD's approach to speed setting and a context-sensitive solution for cities to use on their speed limits. And so this is something to watch in the year ahead, this effort by FHWA to create the speed limit setting guidance. And we'll be watching what that means for future editions of the MUTCD in terms of how speed limit setting information shows up in that document. The other area that's promising is around crosswalks. The new MUTCD language includes explicit permissions to install new crosswalks, where previously the MUTCD language had essentially said, do not install crosswalks except in rare circumstances. And so now the language has changed to say, when you install a crosswalk, here's, do these other things to ensure that it is safe. So it's not a fully flipped narrative, but it is a much more supportive frame that recognizes how people actually walk in the world, and it's something to watch. The new language also includes explicit permissions to install asphalt art and sidewalk extensions, including the needs of people with disabilities. And our understanding is that FHWA will be publishing a guide on quick build accessibility as well, so that treatments like sidewalk extensions can be accessible. And there's a great crossover opportunity with what Beth shared around the Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, which truly are an incredible opportunity. But to be clear, there are still shortcomings that need to be addressed in the MUTCD and stronger reforms that are needed. So 2 areas that we're watching at NACDO and that I would encourage others to watch as well. The first is on signal warrants. Engineers are still encouraged to wait until several people are hurt or killed before installing a traffic signal or a signal control for pedestrians. And so this is a significant shortcoming and concern for us, and it's something that NACDO will be looking at addressing through our own work as well. There are also unnecessary restrictions on how to design bikeways that really do not reflect the reality of cities, especially when it comes to traffic signals and bikes. And so this is an area that we're watching as well in the year ahead, and collaborating and having conversations with FHWA to sort of untangle the ways that bike design shows up in the MUTCD, which is a great segue to the work that NACDO is doing, because we will be working to really comprehensively address bike design in our forthcoming Urban Bikeway Design Guide. So big thing to watch in 2024 is the forthcoming 3rd edition and update to NACDO's Urban Bikeway Design Guide. In the past decade, since the Bike Guide was originally released, we've really seen a transformation in the implementation of bike infrastructure in cities. We've seen, you can see on the graph here, tremendous growth. And in fact, this graph only goes to 2019. So there's more growth beyond the chart. And so in that time, cities have learned a lot around bikeway design, and we've made significant advances in the treatments that we're using. And so where the initial Urban Bikeway Design Guide that NACDO released was really a permission slip for cities to test out and implement bike-friendly streets, the 3rd edition will be a prescription slip, really focused on, if you want to see people of all ages and abilities biking in your city, here are the steps that you need to take for a more holistic approach to a citywide bike network that is accessible for people of all ages and abilities. And so we've been working over the past decade to prepare the material that will inform this 3rd edition that comes out this fall. We've been publishing working papers, we've defined all ages and abilities, we've addressed intersection design, and all of this material will fold into this once in a decade update that we're making to the bike guide to really bring bikeway design and implementation to the next level. I also want to talk a bit about PROAG and accessibility, something else to watch in the year ahead. So looking back at last year, and in fact going back 20 years, PROAG is the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines. Over 20 years since the initial draft was released, and in August of 2023, the U.S. Access Board issued a final rule on accessibility guidelines for pedestrian facilities in the right-of-way. So these guidelines inform federal and state and local government agencies on how to make their pedestrian facilities accessible to people with disabilities, whether that's sidewalks, crosswalks, shared use paths, on-street parking. So this is a really momentous change that we've now seen the final rule issued just last fall. And ahead in 2024, the guidelines now need to be adopted formally by various federal agencies to be mandatory and enforceable. So our understanding is that US DOT will take on this rulemaking in the spring of 2024, and DOJ will take it on in the fall. We don't expect major changes to the content of PROAG. We expect the draft will be adopted as is. But what advocates can do at this point is to continue really keeping the pressure on the federal government to formally adopt PROAG to make it really have the force that it deserves, and to continue centering accessibility as a core goal of our work. Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit about updating and implementing new policy as well, another area to watch in 2024. One area to watch is the US DOT greenhouse gas rule that was just recently finalized as well. In November of last year, so just a few months ago, USDOT released a finalized performance measure that provides states and MPOs with a national framework to track greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. So this is important. This is a significant step forward because it unifies a hodgepodge of incomplete data from different sources into a unified standard so that states and MPOs and the federal government can make informed decisions. This is really important for transparency. You can't measure what you, or sorry, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so having this information is really key. And for advocates in particular, we have an opportunity to really shine daylight onto the investments that are made with taxpayer dollars, with now a greater understanding of which transportation projects contribute to or reduce climate emissions. So this step is a really important, this rule is a really important step on its own, or, for what it is in terms of increasing transparency, but it is insufficient on its own. There is an opportunity and a need now for continued support for this rule and continued pressure so that states are adopting ambitious targets. You can see in my notes here on the slide that the targets are non-binding, which means that we need continued advocacy support to draw attention to the importance of ambitious climate goals. I should note too that 24 states already comprehensively measure their greenhouse gas emissions. But we do know that 21 state attorneys general just sued the Biden administration about these requirements. So this is something to watch in 2024. And the first deadline, I'll note, is just around the corner on February 1st. State DOTs are first required to establish targets and report those targets by February 1st. And so there's an opportunity in the very near term to advocate for ambitious targets. And I know America Walks is doing some work around that. I'll also note the new car assessment program, NCAP, something to watch in 2024. Beth mentioned that pedestrian fatalities are a crisis and at a 40-year high. Over 7,000 pedestrians are killed by drivers each year, which has been steadily increasing in the past couple of decades. Vehicle design plays a crucial role in this crisis. Vehicles are getting bigger and heavier, higher off the ground with worse driver sight lines. And under the federal government's safety rating system, which is known as NCAP, nearly every vehicle gets 4 or 5-star ratings. And that's because the system only considers the safety of those outside the cars, within the cars and not outside of them. And so this framework in the safety ratings results in thousands of preventable deaths each year. So in 2022, NACDO and our members called on USDOT to update NCAP ratings and testing protocols. This is a really critical area for federal action. Cities alone do not have the authority to influence this regulatory area. And so cities called on USDOT to update NCAP ratings. And last year, USDOT proposed including an optional pedestrian crashworthiness test within NCAP. So this is a proposal in the right direction, but it still lets automakers off the hook for designing dangerous vehicles. The pedestrian test is not included in the vehicle's final safety rating, which means that vehicles that perform poorly on the test can still receive 5-star overall safety ratings. And the test is, conducted by car manufacturers themselves. It's voluntary, so it's not something that automakers are required to do. And in fact, they can skip it entirely. So looking ahead at 2024, an opportunity for advocates, we need to keep the pressure on around NCAP and continue advocating for updates that will give consumers really accurate information about vehicle safety, and that will encourage car manufacturers to incorporate life-saving technologies. The last area I want to talk about is autonomous vehicles. This is certainly something to watch in the year ahead. In a number of cities, and a number of NACDA member cities, autonomous vehicles are testing on city streets. But city governments often have very little say over how their streets are used for testing. And the testing has really expanded with minimal oversight. In many NACDA cities, autonomous vehicles have injured pedestrians, they've collided with city buses, they've interfered with emergency response efforts. And again, city governments often have little say or authority over how their streets are used for testing. So we need to see the federal government in partnership with cities and states really taking an approach to autonomous vehicle testing policy and regulation that is proactive, that is forward thinking, that is holistic, that is really focused on safety and equity and sustainability, rather than this wait and see approach to regulation that has gotten us to where we are today. So I just want to, with one final note here, end on a note around cultural norms and expectations, because I think something to watch that we have been watching at NACDO and that we'll continue watching in the year ahead is the national conversation. We're changing the conversation. Coalitions like ours, coalitions in partnership with other organizations, with advocates, are really changing the conversation and drawing more attention to the traffic safety crisis, which puts more pressure on governments at all levels, which really underscores the urgency of the traffic fatality crisis that we're in, and really demonstrates to me why advocacy is so important. So that's something to watch in 2024 and to continue raising our voices for change. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
Okay, getting the video, that was great. And you actually anticipated my first question, and I was typing away in the chat to answer one of the questions there that was kind of getting at the same thing. But my first question is, you know, there's a lot of different things going on, right? And there's kind of granular level detail and lots of ways for people to take something that they're interested in and dig in deeper, whether in a local effort or at a community, you know, or at a state, or even to weigh in on federal issues when they get the opportunity. For example, the greenhouse gas emission rule, you can contact your governor and ask for them to set ambitious targets if that's what moves you. But as you look at this, what do you talk to me? I'll start with you, Beth. What does this all mean for advocates? If, you know, how should an advocate approach all of these opportunities, and what would be your advice?
Well, in terms of, you know, trying to take advantage of all the opportunities, I think seeing them as a lot of different opportunities can be confusing. So the point is, we want to see the trends change. And so starting from the results and working backwards is what's important. The state DOTs and departments of public works at the local level that are not doing well often point to a project or a program they hope to utilize, or their ambitious targets, or, you know, the things that they might have to do regulatorily, but they're not answering the question of the fact that they are not meeting our expectations. And I think everything we need to do needs to start there and return back to it. Every recommendation comes back there. Utilizing the trends and the state shown ambition on these fronts that is being published on the Federal Highways site gives you a place to start. If you are planning for more people to die, how can you say as a leader that you are committed to safety? If you don't think you have the capacity to make a change to that trend, then why should you get any of our money? Sounds like you don't think you're part of the solution. We should give the money to maybe another agency that does think that it can change the outcome and not just ride the wave of fatalities. So I think really being very clear on that point, and not getting caught up in the litany of things it sounds like people are doing, but really, as I come from the South and we say that you're fixing to do something, when you're fixing to do something, you're doing nothing at all. When you get to real action and things are actually changing and there's an understanding the status quo isn't working and therefore the status quo needs to be questioned before the suggestions for innovation and alternatives, that's when you're in a place where you can make real change.
I love that answer. Corinne, what would you say as for advocates on how to approach this smorgasbord of opportunities? And Beth gave a great way: focus on outcomes and hold decision makers accountable to them.
No, I think that's spot on. Beth, as usual, spot on in terms of focusing on outcomes. That's something that, you know, when we're seeing this mismatch between what we are saying are our priorities and what we're actually getting from the system that we have, there's a disconnect, right? And the system needs to change if we do in fact want to see the outcomes that we're saying that we do. But I think for advocates, the other advice that I would have is to focus on local change, because I think there's a real opportunity to demonstrate demand through tangible results. And I also think there's an opportunity to think about feedback loops. This is something that we think about in our theory of change at MACDO, that if we create this change locally, if we create this demand, if we build the advocacy kind of groundswell for something locally, what does that build to demand things at the state level? What does that build to demand more at the federal level as well? And sort of in the opposite direction, if we can get this change at the federal level in the MUTCD, what does that unlock for local action? What does that unlock for state action? So I think it can be very overwhelming. It's acronym soup, right? There are so many different, even in my presentation alone, there were like 12 different acronyms. But if you can think about the ways that they relate and the feedback loops and the opportunities that they unlock, it can kind of paint a more holistic picture.
Nailah, I know that you're one of the questioners, but since you work on local advocacy, I'd love to kind of get your reaction to that question too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to what Beth and Corinne were saying. I wrote down feedback loops because I think that is wildly important to make sure that we are in our advocacy and also like in the implementation, that we have a way to get feedback to hold ourselves accountable, hold our governments accountable. And so I think it is not being overwhelmed, understanding that there's a bigger picture, and that folks need to just, what I like to say, if the Climate Plan Coalition, we have folks that are all across the gamut of transportation, and just do your little piece, and then let's come together and figure out what are the big pieces we can do together. So with that, since I'm talking, I'll take an opportunity to ask my question, which is, I get really kind of frustrated and slightly overwhelmed with all the reports that are out. There are all these reports that are pointing to things that, for my advocacy, that I would love to see implemented. How do we actually move to implementation? What are the techniques? What works? We have the data, we have the spaces, where we're having these conversations, but it seems like it's not really hitting the ground. Any suggestions, ideas on how we move into implementation?
Well, for me, I think part of it is understanding where the authority lies, right? Where the power lies, and who has control over different decisions. And so if we're talking about implementation at a local level, that means understanding, is there a DOT locally, or is it a transportation function within a different department of the city? What kind of control do city council members have? What kind of power does the mayor have? How do we have advocacy conversations that really target the right people? But also, how do we understand that the implementers are people too, right? Are humans doing this work and are juggling a lot, balancing a lot often with constrained resources. How do we create, again, back to that feedback loop concept, how do we create a working relationship feedback loop between advocates and folks either in city government or the federal government that is in partnership, right? That challenges when challenge is what we need, but that collaborates when collaboration is what we need as well. So that would be my 2 cents. Beth, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, and also something that can be quite overwhelming. So the first thing is, when you're working with an agency and you're seeking some sort of change, or you want to implement an idea, you're often going to either be told directly the challenges and barriers that agency is facing, that person is facing, or they're going to hint at it. We as the advocates need to understand why the person we need to act is or isn't acting. And a lot of times, more times than not, it's because they don't think they're allowed to. And so if we are going to move to implementation, we need to move the barriers, the things that make it impossible, in many times illegal, for them to give us what they want. And it requires us to, it's a very person-to-person sort of thing, but it can lead to a list of changes to regulation, guidance, culture, training, all those things that will be useful, that then make the implementation of the change either, well, to start easier, but then hopefully move to what Corinne was talking about, not just permission to do the right thing, but make it hard to do the wrong thing and easy to do the right thing. So if you hear from someone that I can't do that, it will harm the level of service of traffic. You say, great, can you show me the rule that says that? And make them show it to you in writing. Where is it written? Half the time, they won't be able to find the language that they really, truly, in their heart of hearts, believe exists someplace. And that's sometimes because it's changed. And it turns out you don't know every single piece of language that has been changed throughout your agency while you're overworked and churning out projects. And sometimes it is a way to expose that the truth, which is they don't want to. And then you have to get to the bottom of why they don't want to, because it's not normally that they're a bad guy. Sometimes it is, but it's usually because there is a political or cultural barrier that then needs to be handled. And that's where we advocates, we really soar. So it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's not that that there isn't money. Every piece of federal dollars can be spent on this, every single penny of it. But there are rules and regs and trainings and culture and that sort of thing that are truly standing in our way in spite of the data and in spite of the funds.
I'm going to answer Nailah's question too. I really love all this. I think what's so fascinating is oftentimes we focus on, well, what's the policy change that will make a difference, and what is the best policy change? And that's one of the questions in here, in a way, like which policy change would have the most impact. And really what we're talking about, and it was touched on by both Beth and Corinne, is that there's a culture change that has to occur, right? In terms of making things happen. And I personally really appreciate this point about accountability of decision makers. One of the things that really stood, I think for years and years, those of us that have been urging more people-centered places have really been focused on the people who say, oh, but I need a car lane, or I need, I can't give up my parking, or, kind of the voices in the public that are against the change. But what the polling really shows is that the public is very much with us on the vision of what the future should hold. And it's the elected officials, and for those that don't know, I was one for a number of years as mayor of Seattle per term, and I felt it then, and it's even more so now. The elected officials are lagging the public on this. There's a lot of inertia behind the existing system. The existing system works great for some interest groups. Those that build the highways are used to getting the money for a certain type of spending. It's really out of touch with the public. So I think part of the implementation issue is, what are you passionate about, and what is the opportunity in your place? It does all add up. If you've got an interested council member or an interested agency official, or you are one and you see some opportunities, any discussion about how to better use our streets will contribute to that culture change, and whatever you can achieve in your community will add up to a higher level. And I think that building that type of grassroots, personally, I think building that type of grassroots strength and directly holding elected leaders and agency officials accountable to that vision that's in the documents, that's in public opinion, is a necessary precursor to the next federal reauthorization, because we can have to show that strength across the country to convince members of Congress that there's a demand in their locality that's not being met. So that's my 2 cents. Wherever you're useful is probably the best place to start, not what you think might be the best policy, because you got lots of opportunities to change the conversation in your community, depending on where you have a particular role in leveraging things. And we're just trying to give you there's a list here for you to start on, but there's a lot here. Nailah, you mentioned a question to me the other day, and I don't know, the through line question, do you want to put that to people as well?
Yeah, it's really similar to your first question, Mike, which is, again, so I am running a coalition, and I'm just going to center myself in the questions, apparently. And with a bunch of advocates who all care about different issues, what I'm curious is, what do you guys think should be the through line? There's right now 150 plus people listening into the webinar. If we are all like singularly going to take up one issue, or what is something that we all could focus our energy on, what should be the through line of advocacy? You know, especially connecting what's happening at local to what's happening nationally, or like vice versa. Is there some type of drumbeat that we all should be, you know, drumming in this coming year?
Some of it is a retread of what I just said. We are failing. This bipartisan super popular program is not producing good results. And I have to question people who think a program that is producing such terrible results, especially compared to our peers across the world, is worthy of, no oversight, guaranteed funding, and no change. I think we need to recognize that from top to bottom, this program consistently produces bad results in safety, in terms of access to jobs and essential services for those that, frankly, even those who do drive. This car-oriented system is really anti-driver. It's set up so that drivers make mistakes, often fatal mistakes, and then it blames them instead of the design that set them up to fail. It generates traffic with the fewest number of possible people, something that is truly an extraordinary engineering outcome, but not the one we were seeking. And we need to break it down and really push that we're not getting anything being promised. We're not getting roads in better condition. We're not getting easier, faster, more convenient travel. We're not getting safer travel. We're not getting less emissions. So I think really banging the drum and saying, after decades of getting more and more and more funding, and now this, truly unique infusion of federal cash, how come things have gotten worse? And holding those who promised us better results accountable for not producing a program that got us those results is going to be truly key to shifting the debate, because no one wants to change a program that is only a good news program. And that's what we've allowed this program to be, in spite of its failure to produce good results.
Absolutely. And I would add on that, in terms of not getting the outcomes that we want to see, and really getting, as Beth laid out, really failing results in a lot of ways from the extraordinary investment of taxpayer dollars that we're making in the transportation system. What stands out to me really is the 40,000 people number. 40,000 people die every year on US roadways, which is wildly out of proportion with our peer countries and completely unacceptable. 7,000 people die walking every year, completely unacceptable. And we have, culturally and politically, I think, become so accustomed to that level of death on our streets. And that's shocking. That's appalling. That should not be something that we are okay with. And yet, as Beth was describing, we're continuing to pump money into the program that has that result. So I think for an organizing drumbeat, that's an area that I think is just never going to be an okay number, right? 40,000 people. And that's not even mentioning the number of people who are seriously injured, the families who are impacted by traffic violence, the drivers themselves who have the lifelong emotional burden of the crash. That's a number that we really cannot be comfortable with, and something that I think is a really important kind of organizing drumbeat for our movement.
I'm going to, there's so many great questions in the chat. And by the way, this conversation has hit a number of them. So, because we've heard a lot of the same questions. How do we move from policy to implementation, and some questions about how to do that. Here's a question from one of the viewers. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990 and established a federal civil right of accessibility for all people with disabilities. 34 years later, and not a single state or city in our entire country, to the best of this person's knowledge and research, has yet to make all of their existing sidewalks and crosswalks accessible to people with mobility disabilities. Thus, people are often forced to wheel wheelchairs against the flow of traffic. USDOT FHWA accepts this discrimination. Why?
So I will say one of the problems we continually have is we'll make these proclamations, but we don't change the rules, regs, standards, guidances, procedures, trainings, hiring, performance management to match the proclamation. So I could get it passed into law. All open streets must be complete streets. Great. I'm an engineer now, and I want to create a sidewalk, except the regs say I can't. What do? Do I follow my regs and therefore, perform well, deliver a project that is on time and on budget, keep my job, you keep moving up? Or do I yell at my leadership that it doesn't comply with toothless language? That's the problem. We keep doing these things up at 30,000 feet and not making the changes in the nitty-gritty detail of how the programs work. And I know it can be aggravating to get into a debate about how you apply speed limit rules, for example, like Corinne pointed out. But what NACTO has done on speed limits is invaluable. This is how you move things within agencies. Is first you challenge the way they do things and you show what a failure it is, and then you give them a replacement, and then you push the replacement, and when people try it, you show that their results are better. And we need to do this across the board. So again, we have to figure out where in the agencies they are finding barriers to creating the infrastructure needed to make roadways ADA accessible. Right now, there are people that say, well, I could build a sidewalk, but to make it ADA accessible would take up more space. I'd have to narrow the lanes too much. That wouldn't comply with the design manual, so we just won't build sidewalks. That is what we meant. And I think at all levels, with Congress, we need to put some changes and hold FHWA accountable. 2, we need to go into design manuals and rules and guidances at the state and local level and update them. And 3, we need to sue the heck out of people. Right now, I will tell you that the conversations between council and engineers is the status quo is the safest way to go to not get sued. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have to prove that's not true by suing and winning.
Corinne, thoughts on this?
I think Beth covered it pretty well, Mike. So I know we're almost at time
Yeah.
if you've got another question.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think it's also, there's laws and there are laws. And sometimes you need public demand to make people actually take the laws seriously. And I think we see this with complete streets legislation, lots of things like this, where the declaration is made, but people don't really believe that's the law, because then they'd have to change things more than they want to. So there's a further effort needed on that. I think, why don't we pull up? I think we're just about at time. I really feel a little bit bad about how many questions we didn't get to. So I'm gonna make a few comments. One is, please reach out if I saw, for example, a question about I'm a local elected official. How do I get at funding opportunities? We have something called the Intersections Initiative. You can email us at info@americawalks.org. We'll follow up with you. There were questions, other questions in the chat. I'll ask our attendees to take a look at them and see if we can knock a few more off. I will also raise an opportunity that I think is really important, which is we did our first ever National Week Without Driving last year. We're going to do it again in the coming year, the first week of October. It's a really great opportunity to get elected and agency officials to understand what it is like for their constituents that do not drive. Many of them actually don't have that experience, don't know what it means to wait out on the street for a bus without a shelter, or walk on a street without a sidewalk, or come across the challenges of getting to a place with transit at all. So I'd invite people to join in the National Week Without Driving. There was a great question here from a local elected official. How do I learn more about the complexity of transportation? Transportation for America has the Champions Institute. Look into that. America Walks, we're also developing trainings that we have our walking college. Pay attention to that. We love to try to give people, advocates, agency officials that aren't in the transportation field, and elected officials, kind of the know-how to stand toe-to-toe with the elected official that says, the agency official that says, no, we can't do that, or that's not possible. As Beth has pointed out many times, it is possible. And these rule changes we're seeing actually have opened up the door for a lot more action for those that want to take it, if they're willing to. So with that, we're going to call it a close. I'll call up the last slide. and just say, if you think this programming matters, if you like that these webinars come to you, please make a donation to America Walks. We have some great funding partners, but their money often comes with strings attached. Whereas the donation that you give to America Walks enables us to do something like the National Week Without Driving, even though we don't have a dedicated funder for it, or to do all of these trainings for people, or even to just pick up the phone and give you some personal service on how can I work better in my local community to make a change. So please think of us, and please thank, and please, I know you're not here to clap, but if you were, please thank Corinne and Beth and Nailah for the conversation. And thank you for attending, and thank you for everything you do in your community.